As we were developing Pillars of Eternity, we initially were, are we going to publish this ourselves or not publish it ourselves? And at some point we're like, we're not a publisher and we're not like in a position where we can kind of become a publisher. So we started talking to a lot of different publishers and we ended up working with Paradox. But while we were working with them, they were wondering if there was other products we were doing.
The interesting thing is that we had done this successful Pillars of Eternity Kickstarter, and we found in Paradox a publisher that wanted to work with us, and they were super excited about Pillars of Eternity. And they were so excited about it that they were like, hey, we want to make this isometric role-playing game. We want to make a different one. Do you have any ideas? And we were like, well, yeah, we've got this Defiance that became Fallen that will become Tyranny. And so there wasn't really this huge like professional proposal period for Tyranny, because we had already gone through developing this core idea for so long. It was easy for us to hand it to them and get rolling on something.
What's helped us as a studio be successful, I think, over the long term, is that we've stayed making RPGs mostly, but we have a tool set, a group of tools that do quests and journal entries and dialogue and all these things that we've now been using since all the way back in Neverwinter Nights 2. And this is a through line through all of our products. And if you take a game like Tyranny, we introduced a new feature called the glossary, which is when there's a word that you don't know what it is, you click on it and it brings up an entry. So now you can understand it. Now in these big RPG worlds that we create, it really helps people go, oh, now I can understand that. For those of us that don't always remember all the names of things, it helps us remind us of what a thing is. And by doing that and then making sure that is incorporated into our tool system and how our tools work, it lets us continue to keep those things moving forward. And that means those features and all the systems and, there's a lot of stuff behind making games that I think people always forget. We put in an amazing amount of energy over the years of localizing our games. And now we're into like more than 10 languages sometimes. And that's a challenge, and luckily we have this tool system and a tool team that makes it all happen. And that just becomes a given whenever we start up a new project. But also again, this tool system allows us to take features that we continually add and come up with from project to project and make that available to our future projects.
Yeah, Tyranny, I think, is a great example of a game where we focused on true role-playing mechanics, like true, like great system building. And it had a lot of really, really cool features in it. Like the glossary and stuff like that. Like these are things that we were able to look at mechanically and say like, hey, this is something we got right. This is something we want to replicate or build upon in a future game. Like these are systems that, if possible, we want to include in every role-playing game that we make from here on out. And I think that that's really helpful, and I think it's really influential when we have a game that we can look at like that and say like, yeah, this one's got a lot of stuff that we really nailed. We can figure out how to do it better and cooler and even swankier next time, and let's do that. So Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire was the first sequel to our own game, and that is kind of crazy. We had made sequels to other people's games, a lot of them, and yet we had never been able to make a sequel to our own game. So when it was time to make Pillars of Eternity 2, that was pretty great. It was pretty special.
When we got to do with Deadfire, that was awesome, just because it just meant like, okay, so we created this world, we made this game, we got this game funded, and now we get to go play in this world again. Because for me, that's like what I love that we do. Like we get to go play in worlds. And this meant we got to keep on playing in one of our own worlds.
I don't think I had a concept of how unusual that was for our studio, just because Pillars was my first project here. So I heard people say, oh, this is our first sequel that we're doing in-house to one of our own games. And I thought, cool, we're doing Pillars again, but with more stuff.
It was the first sequel. It really was the first time that we had a technology base that was our technology base that we were able to build off of. And that was really fantastic.
That was a really cool experience to be able to work on Deadfire and improve pretty much all aspects of what we did. There's a lot of refactoring of systems that we felt like if we had another chance to do it, let's change these things and make it a lot better. a lot more flexible for the designers.
For Deadfire, I've consistently held that my goals were just to do everything better, which sounds so simple-minded, but it really was, how can we make the combat better? How can we make the companion interactions better? It really was to look at every key part of the game and say, how can we take this to the next level in a way where we don't have to explain to players what we've done. Players will look at the game and play the game and immediately realize, wow, this really looks like they've leveled up.
It still blows my mind looking at Deadfire, how well it looks, how well the lighting all interacts properly, how well the characters are integrated into the 2D backgrounds, and to be able to have like dynamic light all working properly with dynamic shadows. Very, very impressed with what the team was able to accomplish.
So for Deadfire, we decided to go with Fig, which was a different crowdfunding system. And Fig was kind of interesting because it allowed you to do a lot of the same things that Kickstarter did, but it also allowed people to sort of like invest in the product itself. A lot of people have sort of asked, like, did that create a bunch of pressure for you guys? Did it change things for you guys? And the answer, I think at the end of the day, at least my perception of it, and I think the team's perception of it, is no. It actually didn't really change anything for any of us because we're game developers and we want to make awesome games. And we're going to stretch whatever budget or whatever schedule we can as far as we can to make the coolest thing that we can.
Crowdfunding campaign, whether it's Kickstarter or Fig, yeah, it's definitely a very exhausting and challenging time. You always have to be prepared for the unexpected. You know, at the same time, there is a lot of excitement, but it's also something where you have to almost constantly think about it 24 hours a day. And it is definitely a thing that, you know, it's a very exciting time when it's over.
I didn't really care about the idea of Deadfire being crowdfunded or not crowdfunded. I mean, again, I don't want to run a company. I don't want to answer to anyone who is sort of holding the strings of money. So I guess I would rather answer to the audience than to answer to publishers. But that said, sometimes living up to the audience expectation, especially when it's a lot of backers, that can be a frustrating process at times. So it's a weird feeling because you have to be extremely grateful to everyone who has had faith in you to make these games, but also they all want a different game. There's a lot of overlap in the type of game that they want, but then there's a lot of things that are very specific to individual people, and trying to make all of them happy during the development process can be very stressful and weigh on you. So that's the only part of it that troubled me.
At the end of the day, I'm glad that we had a lot of people who wanted the game, and we had a lot of people who were already fans of Pillars 1. And so it was kind of less of a surprise when it happened. Obviously, it was necessary for us to make the game, and I think we made an incredible game because of it.
My hope was we might not bring some of our old backers, but maybe we'll have some new backers. And crowdfunding continued to kind of grow. It felt less risky than trying to just spend our own money putting pitches together for new projects with publishers.
You know, I didn't think it was going to do the same amount, or, you know, we did better on the Fig campaign than we did on the first Kickstarter campaign. And yeah, that definitely was something that I was very surprised at, but it also is a good thing that felt like, yeah, people liked what we did. People, you know, and that's always a good positive feeling. You know, our pitch for the Fig campaign was really well done. I thought we did a spectacular job putting that together, showing off some of those graphical features that I talked about, seeing Adair smoking his pipe on the docks and seeing the ocean waves, seeing the rain come down and having the NPCs cover their heads, seeing some of those dynamic lighting improvements that we made. You could totally see that it was definitely elevated from what we did in Pillars 1. And I think people noticed it, and they were very excited about having us do another one. And that was a good feeling.
So when we look at the crowdfunding campaigns for Pillars of Eternity 1 and Pillars of Eternity 2, Deadfire, we obviously wanted to do better with the second crowdfunding. And we did. We knew we couldn't generate the same, it's the first time sort of feeling or all of the nostalgia that we were able to build with the first one. But we really wanted to expand the community. We wanted to get even more players excited about playing this game. And we were able to do that with the second crowdfunding campaign. And so I think that for the team and for the studio, it just felt really great to go out there and do something so well a second time that we were able to top ourselves.
Deadfire went, from my perspective, extremely smoothly. We had an incredibly good production team. We had an incredibly good, pretty much every team, if I really break it down. Almost everyone who's working on that was super excited to be working together and working on the game that we were working on.
I think that I did not do a great job with the main plot and story of Deadfire. I was responsible for that. And I think that's probably the area of the game that I feel is the not tremendous drop from Pillars 1, but I think the narrative team did a great job on Pillars 1, and on Deadfire, I feel responsible for kind of botching that. I also feel like the ship-to-ship combat game is understandably the most derided part of Deadfire. I think that every other thing in Deadfire is just better. I think that the full voiceover, even though it was a pain to do, did really elevate the presentation of the game. The environments are beautiful. Having the big world map to explore is incredible. I really think that Deadfire, I don't think Pillars is a bad game. I think it's a great game. And I think Deadfire really improves on it, and I'm very proud of it. There are a few places where I feel like I personally made some poor decisions, or I was kind of in a position where I had to do something that wound up being bad. But ultimately, I think that Deadfire is the better game.
Yeah, so at the end of Deadfire, the one thing that was looking like it was going to have a hard time getting across the finish line was audio. And so I was the development director for the studio at the time, and I said, you know what, I've got enough cycles. I can step in and help really figure out how to get audio focused and get them across the finish line on this. And I'll be honest, I really like audio. I enjoy it a lot. I think it's super important in games. And so I've always tried to make sure that experience is great for whatever project I was working on. Going and doing that on Deadfire was really fun for me. It was a really great experience. It made me feel like I was really contributing to getting the game done as more of a direct person working on it rather than as almost an executive who's overseeing what's going on the project, but not working on it day to day.
Early on to that project, kind of scoped it out and estimated how much it was going to cost and sat down with the owners about it. I was, I think, right within like 5% of that number. The only thing is it took a little bit longer than we wanted to. I think it took a couple extra months because we had to do some bug fixing at the end. But outside of what I wish was optimization and bug fixes, I think that development pretty much went exactly the way we wanted it to, and even better in a lot of places. Like there were a lot of things that came up throughout the development that I was just shocked that they came together as well as they did.
Full voiceover requires a lot of commitment to every single character being voiced. And when every single character is being voiced, there are huge logistical challenges. If you have literally hundreds of characters, you have to figure out how are you possibly going to finalize all those scripts, write all the character sides, which are kind of the profiles that go to casting and the actors. How are you going to actually schedule the recording sessions? How are you going to split up the actors' times across characters? How are you going to make sure that an actor's voice is not talking to the same voice from that same actor in a different character? It's really a lot of work. It's very challenging. It's very stressful. And the bigger the project and the more characters and the more actors and the more lines of dialogue, the more stressful it becomes.
Deadfire obviously released to very good reviews. Super excited about that project. The press loved it. The consumers that were part of the Kickstarter loved it. And when it came out, I was super excited for the team, and I was super pleased with the response that it got, both critically and with the consumers that were out there and the gamers that were out there. I will admit, I wish that it had done better commercially. Like, I think that it had or could have done better in different circumstances. And I don't know exactly, what we did wrong there, because I think we did something wrong. Like, I think the game is awesome, and it should have in every way surpassed the first one. But I think commercially it was not as successful as we would have liked. And so that's kind of a bummer.
We had a long road to actually getting a publisher to do a lot of the work to publicize the game. And that delay really cost us. One could say that anyone working with us would have had a big challenge because it had been punted for so long. And then once we got going, it was very difficult to get materials together. And when those materials got together, if there were problems, there usually wasn't enough turnaround to fix major issues. So if there was something that was really foundational to the problem with some piece of marketing material, sometimes the solution was, we're throwing it all away. Like, we can't rework this. We can't use it. And that was very frustrating. In the days leading up to the launch of Deadfire, we knew that our pre-orders were 3 times higher than they had been for Pillars, which was incredible. And there was a high degree of confidence, I'll say it for myself, that the game was going to sell really well. And it sold very well to that core audience, and then it did not sell well. Like, immediately after launch, it didn't do well. And of course, there were criticisms among the player base about things like combat difficulty or the story or, ship-to-ship combat. But I don't ultimately think that those criticisms were so dramatic or so overwhelming that it just, massively turned the tide. I think that people just didn't know the game existed. And in fact, years after, when Deadfire sales really started picking up, a recurring comment I saw from a lot of people was, I didn't even know they were making a sequel, or I didn't know that the game actually came out.
Like, I get it, and I actually understand a lot better, with perspective and experience now, that novelty is its own factor, right? Pillars of Eternity 1 was such a kind of out of nowhere return to form on so many great things that I really shouldn't have been surprised and been very happy that I got an 88. But at the time, I was definitely hoping for ridiculously high scores. And I get all the criticism and everything else that the game's gotten, obviously. But I was sad at the time. I was very sad at the time about it.
We knew that we wanted to start another IP. We had been successful with Pillars of Eternity. We knew that that was the way forward, working on our own IPs and starting something cool. And the founders had gotten together and talked about it, and we'd said like, hey, yeah, we should make a space IP. That sounds cool. And then it was very confusing for me because Fergus is working with Tim Kaine on it, which makes sense to me. But then I keep hearing like Leonard Boyarsky's name, and I'm like, what? How are we working with Leonard on this? And so eventually Leonard just is like, he leaves his job at Blizzard and we hire him like not that long later. And I guess we had been quietly talking about him to see if he wanted to work on it with us. And so then we had Tim and Leonard together as a team again, right? This creative duo that had worked on so many games at Interplay with Fallout, but then again at Troika. And seeing those two work together is really exciting.
I had been talking a bit with Fergus and with Tim about, trying to develop a new IP for the company and what that would look like. And, and at the time I was talking with Tim, we kind of started talking about the idea of trying to get Leonard over to the company as well, with the idea that, me, Tim, and Leonard would kind of be the 3 directors on a new IP that would be, what we kept calling Fallout in space.
From my perspective, Tim and Leonard were kind of working together for a couple months on basically building up a universe, but a lot of us didn't get to see it for the first, 9 months that they were working together. And then it went from Tim and Leonard to 10 people to 60 people very quickly.
At that time as well, Mel, RU decided that they were going to take over all development of Armored Warfare. We had to wind down development internally on it and transfer all of our infrastructure over to Russia. And since I was the de facto per force administrator at the company at the time, a lot of that effort fell right on my shoulders. So after a couple of months of working with Tim and Leonard, trying to get Outer Worlds going, I had to kind of step away from it and focus on getting Mail.ru what they needed, getting the armored warfare infrastructure set up in Russia. And so I handed the reins over to Mark DeGeorge to be the programming director on Outer Worlds.
I'd worked with Tim Kaine on Fallout and Arcanum. We had our own company, Troika, where we made a couple games. Hadn't worked with him for about 10 years. He called me up, said Obsidian wanted to make a game with him, and he really wanted me to come over and make it with him. So sounded like a great idea. We worked really well together in the past. I thought it'd be really fun to do.
They have a perspective that obviously had a huge amount of influence on the founders at the studio and the type of RPGs we make, because they made so many foundational RPGs. And so getting to work with them directly was, it was just a really awesome opportunity to work with, feels bad to say, but just like legends of the game industry.
I worked at Blizzard. They'd made games a different way. Obviously they've been very successful, but I started at Interplay and I learned how to make games there. And we kind of continued that at Troika, me and Tim and Jason, and coming to Obsidian really felt like coming home. And, I remember how to make games this way. This is really kind of like how I like to make games. This is the approach I like to take. So it felt really great. And then, of course, the fact that there were so many people here that I'd known for 25 years at the time was also really nice.
We're also very happy to announce that we will be acquiring Obsidian Entertainment in Irvine, California.